Let's first look at these because the other ones have not printed out yet. So we're going to start with something that perhaps you all know because everybody remembers Baba Mencia, right? So Monica, can you pick up the top? It's the obligation to return lost objects.
If one sees an item that belongs to another Jew and was lost, he is obligated to take that object and return it to its owner. One who sees a lost object and ignores it violates a mitzvot lo taseh, Torah prohibition that forbids ignoring a lost object, and also neglects a mitzvah aseh, affirmative biblical command, to return lost objects to their owner, as the Torah commands. Do not see your fellow's ox or sheep wandering astray and ignore them. You shall return them to your fellow. Devarim 22:1. If a person takes the item with the intention of keeping it rather than returning it to its owner, he also violates the Torah prohibition against theft. Lo tizgol, thank you. If, however, the finder then decides to return the object to its owner, he has corrected his mistake and is no longer in violation of these prohibitions, assuming the owner had not despaired from retrieving the item. If the owner despaired after the finder took the object for himself, the finder is guilty of these violations, even if he then returns the object.
Okay, so it has to do with when the owner despairs. And the next section is going to talk about a siman. Ed, do you want to pick up there?
Okay, this obligation does not apply to possessions that have no siman, meaning a distinguishing figure by which it can be identified as a person's possessions.
So siman is something that you can actually determine. So I know that Monica's book is Monica's because Monica has Monica's name in it, or sign or signature or something. That's a siman.
Okay. All right, so it only applies to objects with simans?
Yes, kind of, sort of. I don't know that we're ready to get to a final halakha yet.
Okay.
There was a previous one to this.
There's all sorts of ones with regard to Baba Mencia. So we're just gonna sort of gloss over the top of obligation to return lost objects. We've got a little bit of history there going about what the Torah says and where these come from. So in Devarim, that's our proof text, or I should say jumping off point. Do not see your fellow's ox or sheep wandering astray and ignore them. You shall return them to your fellow. So if you don't return it, if you take it and you keep it, obviously that's a problem. So if something has a siman, it means that we can identify whose it is. Money, however.
Okay, money, for example, has no siman. There is nothing on a coin or a dollar bill whereby it can be definitively identified as belonging to a particular person. Therefore, if a person drops money in a public place, one who finds the money is allowed, strictly speaking, to keep the money. People generally feel their pockets regularly to ensure their money is still with them, and it can therefore be assumed that the money's owner realizes that he has lost the money and has despaired, since the money has no siman and was left in a public place. According to strict halakha, then one who finds money that was lost in a public area may keep the money for himself, even if he knows whom it belonged to, since the owner has presumably despaired.
Okay, so does that sound right?
Well, I think God always has a plan for things to happen the way they're supposed to happen.
Okay, so the whole concept of hashgacha pratit, or divine providence, great.
So on the bare minimalist, if you find money and it doesn't have any
If you
kind of
find money
identification
where? If
in a
you
public
find-
place,
In a public place.
but
that's
even
the
in a
important piece.
private place on private property, if there's a wedding and there's money and it's found and it has no identification, even though you may assume you know who it belongs to, you can keep it.
All correct, but that has to do with a lot of people.
Right, and then
It's not the issue of public versus private there,
Right.
it's still like a public place. So
'Cause it's a
the
wedding.
Rabbanim were saying it's like a public place, so therefore you can keep it.
But it's also alluding to the fact that if you have a little higher ethics and you know who it's going to belong to, you're going to return it.
Which I think we're gonna get into in the next paragraph perhaps, so go ahead.
Of course, this applies only if the money is indeed unidentifiable as a particular person's property. If the money was found in a wallet or was stacked in some particular way whereby it can be identified as belonging to somebody, then the finder must return the money to its owner.
Okay, so got that, must return. must return if, what conditions are required?
If it's in a identifiable, if it's, you can
Okay,
identify
so if
it.
it's in a wallet or stacked in a particular way. So I knew that I had specifically, 20 quarters and they were stacked 5, 5, and 5, or whatever it is. Okay, go ahead. Do
Although this is the strict halakha, one who finds lost money fulfills a midat hasidut, measure of piety, if he returns it to the owner. He is allowed to keep the money, but it is worthwhile as a midat hasidut to return it.
So what is this measure of piety thing?
It's to analyze it and not actually know the exact meaning is that you adhere to a higher course of ethics. There's a higher standard that you hold yourself to instead of just the bare minimum. The bare minimum says, if it doesn't have any identification, I can keep it, even though I know who it belongs to.
So why hold yourself to a higher standard? Anybody else commenting?
Because we're supposed to continue to get ourselves to a higher plane.
Oh. So does it help to get ourselves to a higher plane by
Could be.
holding ourselves to a higher standard?
Absolutely.
So practicing that ethical kind of behavior is kind of a way to get ourselves there. So even if I know that I'm entitled to keep the money, halakhically speaking, I'm going to try to do a little better. I'm going to try to return it or give it back to whomever it is, even though I know technically I don't have to. So Mike, you want to pick up there the question?
The question arises as to why Torah allows one to keep money that is found in a public area, even if he knows who lost it. Why shouldn't the finder be required to turn the money to the rightful owner? The answer is mentioned in several works. Is that Hashem settles all accounts.
I think that's probably what Monica was referring to earlier. That God has this kind of plan somehow, and however it goes, that's the way it should be, or it happens.
And we can rest assured that the finder, rightfully deserves the money. It is possible, for example, that the previous
Gilgal.
Incarnate, okay. The owner owned the finder money and never paid him. And for this reason, Hashem arranged that the money would be lost and then found. We never know for sure what the precise reasons or why these situations occur, but we do know that God precisely calculates people's assets, and that there is a reason why he saw to it that a person would lose money and it would be found by someone else.
Okay, so now we've got this whole concept of, in the greater scheme of things, this was what was supposed to happen. Somebody lost something, and then somebody found it, and that was the way it was supposed to go. And maybe it had to do something with a past life.
Yeah, but this sheet's a very simplification of Bava Metzia, because
This is the boiled down nutshell halakha.
Yeah, to be
Comes in the email every morning.
determining what is lost property sometimes is very difficult.
Of course, all of these things are, but at least this is an area with which many people are familiar because many people have studied Bava Metzia. So, okay. Parashat Kitavo.
So this is his commentary to Kitavo.
This is not his commentary. This is his halachic findings based upon this parsha.
Do you know what time he lived?
Ben Ish Chai, I want to say
It's
1800s. Who's got their Google capabilities up? Where's that?
Well, I've got my laptop up. I can get real Google.
Okay, so let's go find.
Used to write letters to the Gaon of Vilna.
Now what are we looking
say
at?
again?
Used to write letters.
Letters to the Gaon of Vilna.
Yeah.
All right, so we're assuming that he's older than 1800. So let's see what we can find.
We're looking up the Ben Ish.
Ben Ish Chai, and I'd probably spell it with a CH.
Let me see. Oh, here's Wikipedia. Yosef Hayim. No, we don't want him. We want him.
It's Yosef Chaim. That is his
Yosef
name.
Hayim. Yeah.
1832. So he Iraqi
Yeah.
Jew. Master Kabbalist, authority on Jewish law. Most of our halachists were also good Kabbalists.
Was born in Baghdad. Yep, 1832, exactly as she said. You got it.
Okay, so any more information about him?
Oh,
He
lots.
studied in his, well, I mean, the nutshell version. He studied in his father's library at age 10. He left the Beit Midrash, began to study with his uncle. 1851, he married Rachel. They had some kids.
But this is very kind of unorthodox.
That's bicep, like,
Commentary.
very dangerous.
Uh,
You can't hide anything.
He's best known as the author of the works of Halakha ben Ish Hai, by which title it is also colloquially known.
Colloquially.
Colloquial.
This is
Ben
kind of
Ish Hai.
dangerous if there is like, if I find money like the entrance hall here, I know there's just 6 people here, or 5 people,
Yes.
and
See,
I
that just
keep
doesn't
it-
seem
wait,
ethical to me.
Wait, you are bringing a very different case, because your case is a private, not a public.
okay, see.
It's kind of public, though. You have a
Wait,
class.
Wait,
Okay.
go ahead.
See, the same lesson takes place in the temple's library, okay? And people kind of drop their quotes and somebody drops some money, and there are just a few people there. And I can say, oh, nothing is written in the money, maybe I deserve it, maybe whoever out of these 5 people who lost it deserves to lose it, I might deserve to find it. This is kind of like this.
You don't like the outcome of this.
Outcome, and I just hope there will be somebody fairly decent. So I can say that he wasn't as smart as the sages. I don't know.
Well, you know, the other flip side of this coin is you have to have a number of factual pieces. So a house is not a public place. When you have a shul and you have 5 people there, arguably it's probably not public. It's when you get a collection of people, at least more than 10, and you've got somebody who is dropping, you know, a single dollar on the floor, which is different than dropping specifically a $50 bill or a $100 bill, right?
Yeah.
Those are probably different situations.
Yes.
So each piece, and it was near the coat. I mean, you know, when we go to Bava Metzia, we look at some details like if I'm the money changer and there's, you know, a 25 cents, but it's on my side of the counter, then it's probably mine. But if it's on your side of the counter, okay, maybe it's probably yours. There's a lot of little very nuanced factual pieces that make things very different. So public versus private, where it was, just because it's money doesn't mean there's no siman. You know, and if somebody announces, I've lost a $20 bill, then you've got a different case.
But Talmud is very careful. It describes in great detail a situation like that, and it's hard to fool kind of yourself, you know, with that. But you read something like that, and it becomes very easy to fool myself, you know.
Without looking at
Yeah.
the
If I-
little
well, I-
details. If I'm
yeah.
only gonna look at this one and take a broad picture,
Yeah.
broad gloss, I can say, oh yeah, it's mine.
But when you also have another problem comes involved. Where do you announce that and when?
Well, we don't have Talmudic
No.
times and we don't have the big rock.
Well,
So
if-
obviously,
if
if
the-
somebody,
if-
and it's not gonna be a pilgrimage
If-
festival
if
issue, you
the
gotta
city-
announce it
right.
immediately.
Well,
So,
or a pilgrimage festival at a given rock, the lost property rock. So consequently, there's a whole lot, even though this is very short, there's a whole lot of holes in there, you know. But if you look at the point of teaching you to reach a higher plane,
Wait, Tom.
then it's good.
Can you,
yeah, we're gonna have to share,
Share.
Mike has got 3 there, so
okay, Mike, I'll take one over
Monica, we're
here.
back to you again,
Okay, I'll
and
keep
we're
this
gonna,
one.
No, you don't have to, Tom, sit down, it's good, there's plenty.
Okay.
How about if I give you this one has all the resources on it.
I have, I copied
Responsa.
the short version.
Yeah.
Anybody else need one?
No, we're good, we actually had
Tom,
enough.
one? It's right here.
I thought we got Tom one.
Shot, is it really forbidden for Jewish men to listen to women singing? Rabbi David Goldingham.
Who came here and
Mhm.
actually, is it more than once? How many times has he been here?
He was twice, but only once was in public kind of, when people got to, everybody was
What a very interesting man to listen
Oh, I'm sorry, I missed
He
him.
was
He's a
a
rabbi,
rabbi.
scholar, and mensch.
to.
Wow.
Mhm.
Question.
He's in memory of somebody else, Rabbi Scholar.
Oh,
He
I'm
doesn't
sorry, you're
call
absolutely
himself
right. Rabbi Moshe,
Yeah.
Oh, thank you. I misunderstood that.
But
he's
it's
definitely
probably true of him as well,
Yes,
so.
absolutely.
Question, on September 5th, 2011, an IDF entertainment troupe performed at an official military event focusing on Operation Cast Lead at Bahad al-Had, the officers' training base in the Negev. When a female soldier began to sing solo, 9 observant Israeli officer cadets got up and left, and they said that it was forbidden for them to listen to women singing. The regiment commander, Uzi Kiker, ran after them and ordered them to return to the ceremony. Anyone refusing this order will be dismissed, from the course. In the end, 4 cadets refused to return to the hall and were dismissed from the officers' training course, while 5 were allowed to continue the course after convincing the committee that the move had not been pre-planned. It should be noted that a considerable number of officers' course subsequently various
Are observant.
Excuse me.
Cadets are observant, and most of them did not walk out.
Oh, thank you, I missed that.
So, okay, all right, so this is actually a fairly recent event, and struck up huge amounts of controversy within the press. So do you want to pick up
Yeah.
subsequently there, Tom?
Okay.
Subsequently, various Orthodox rabbis were quoted in the media as being for or against their actions. As
Ashkenazi,
Ashkenazi chief rabbi of Israel, Yona
Yuna Metzger.
Metzger, issued a formal response on September 25th, justifying their actions and urging the army to arrange that only men should sing at military events, where many observed men are present. It is really forbidden for
Is
Jew-
it?
Is it really forbidden for Jewish men to listen to women singing? Was there any halachic justification for soldiers to walk out?
Okay, and so this is actually part of a greater discussion within Israel currently, which has to do with the quote, disappearance of women from billboards, from posters, from commercials, all of those kinds of things. So this is part of something that has been brought up in many places in the media. So, and Rabbi Golinkin, who is a conservative rabbi, is going to address it, specifically starting with Talmudic sources. Ed?
3 Talmudic sources. All halakhic discussions on this topic are based primarily on one sentence uttered by the Amorash Shmuel of Babylon, which is 220, year 220. Some rabbis have claimed that his intent is clear. We shall see below that this is very far from the case. The sentence appears in 3 places in rabbinic literature, twice in the Babylonian Talmud and once in the Yerushalmi Talmud. All right, so in Brachot 24a contains a lengthy sugya about whether one may recite the Shema in immodest situations, such as 2 men sharing a bed or a family sharing a bed, where the man's clothes are torn.
Or when.
Or when the man's clothes are torn and do not cover his privates. The Talmud continues. Rabbi Yitzhak says, a handbreadth in a woman, what?
A hand's breadth is considered arva, which is nakedness, so unchastity or propriety. What he's really talking about is how much is too much. Hey, Alan, good to see you. So, do we have someone who could share with Alan?
I won't.
Okay. All right, so how much as a hand breadth? It's a hand breadth which is measured in this direction. So how much becomes too much in terms of being chaste or improper? Go ahead.
Okay.
The
Okay.
Talmud discusses,
Where are we?
it's in the brackets, the Talmud discusses this and concludes.
It concludes, rather, he is talking about his wife and when reciting the Kriyat Shema.
Okay, so keep going, it'll become a little bit more, we're trying to figure out what is this thing called erva. Erva has to do with something being improper or immodest. So we're gonna look at several definitions. Next is Rav Chisda.
All right, a thigh in a woman is erva, and it is written, bear your thigh, wade through the rivers, and it is written, your erva shall be uncovered, and your shame shall be exposed.
So he's bringing proof text from Isaiah to try to tell us what is this concept. He's trying to give us more information. Go ahead.
All right, Shmuel said in Kol Shah erva, a woman's voice is erva, as it is written in Song of Songs, for your voice is sweet and your appearance is comely.
Okay, so from Shir HaShirim, Shmuel is telling us it's a woman's voice. That's what the problem is. But Rav Sheshet,
Rav Sheshet said, hair in a woman is erva, it is written, your hair is like a flock of goats.
okay, so all of these people have different opinions and impressions about what is this thing called Arava.
I'm sure he'd walk up to a woman and say, your hair is like a.
Yeah, what does that mean?
Well, because it comes from Shir HaShirim,
It's very pretty.
it's thought to be something kind of sexy, right? So, which is why,
In its day.
among other reasons,
Long and curly is usually what,
Sure, walk up to somebody on Friday night and say.
are we talking about goats now?
And say, your hair looks like a flock of
The
goats.
goats. Well,
And see
probably
how-
back in the old
and-
days, it was really like a come on
and
look,
if
maybe,
they-
right?
And if they weren't in this class.
Maybe if it said lamb, if you're shearing
Could
lamb, you
be, could be. All right,
have softer hair
When they
maybe,
say
but a
Shammos said,
flock of goats, you think of a tough old Billy.
what did you say? Kol Isha Erva. A woman's voice is Erva.
is it, when they
So-
say Shammos said, does the text say that Shammos said, or are they attributing the
No, Shmuel is saying that the voice is Erva because in Shir HaShirim, your voice is sweet.
Okay.
That's why. He's pulling that as his text. Now, it doesn't say that it's immodest, but they're making that leap of assumption.
Right.
Okay? Go ahead.
There are at least three major problems with the sugya. None of these four Amoraim mention the Shema at all, and it appears that this unit was copied here in its entirety from some other context. Jastrow in his Talmudic dictionary and many others think that Samuel is referring to a woman singing. It is not at all clear whether Samuel means the speaking voice of a woman or the singing voice of a woman. On the one hand, he may mean the speaking voice of a woman, see Psalm 104, 24, 21, Midrashim on the verse in Song of Songs 2:14 in the Bar Ilan Responsa project, Metzudat, David, to a Song of Songs. On the other hand, he may mean the singing voice of a woman. See the beginning of the verse in Song of Songs, Ta'anit, 16a and 6, Midrashim on Song of Songs.
And 6 Midrashim. So maybe it's meaning just women speaking is Erva. Maybe that's the problem. So,
It is also not clear if this is halakha or agadah. If they were making halakhic statements, they would have said, it is forbidden to look at a woman's thigh or to hear her voice or look at her hair. Therefore, they seem to be making agadic statements followed by verses. At the most, we can say that the editor of the Sugya, who copied this unit here, was trying to say that when one recites the Shema, he should avoid a woman's hand breath or thigh or voice or hair.
do you think
What is a hand breath?
hand breath is a hand this amount?
Like measuring a horse.
Yeah. There would be that.
a hand
So-
breath of what? A hand breath of,
Well, they don't specify.
Exposed skin?
Exposed skin is essentially what's the implication. So, so number 2 in Kiddushi,
Kiddushin contains a lengthy story about a man from
Nehardea.
Nehardea who insults Rav Yehuda while visiting Pumbedita.
Badita, the yeshiva in Badita.
Rabbi Yehuda then excommunicates him and declares him as a slave. The man then summons Rabbi Yehuda to a din Torah in front of Rav Nachman in Nehardea. Rav Yehuda asks his friend Rav Huna whether he should go, and Rav Huna advises him to go. Rav Yehuda then goes to Nehardea to the house of Rav Nachman, but since he resents going, he challenges everything that Rav Nachman does and frequently uses the words of Samuel to do so. The story continues.
You want to go ahead and do the story?
Rav Nachman, may my daughter Duna come and give us a drink. Yehuda said to him, So said Samuel, one does not use a woman, Nachman, but she is a minor, Yehuda. Samuel said explicitly, one does not use a woman at all, whether she's an adult or minor, Nachman. Would my Lord like to send shalom to my wife Yalta? Yehuda said to him, so said Samuel, Kol be'isha erva, a voice of woman is erva. That is, I'm not allowed to talk to her. Nachman, it is possible to talk to her via a messenger. Yehuda said to him, so said Samuel, one does not ask about the welfare of a woman, Nachman, via her husband. Yehuda said to him, so said Samuel, one does not ask about the welfare of a woman at all. Yalta then insults her husband Nachman.
Tells her
Excuse me.
husband.
Yama then tells her husband Nachman to get to the point so Rav Yehuda should stop insulting him.
So you've got to kind of get the play that's going on behind the scenes here, right? You can't talk to a woman, you can't send hello, or whatever, and they're having this argument, and in her opinion, Rav Yehuda is insulting Rav Nachman, right?
Of course.
What is exactly the insult that he's saying? Bring a woman in here and have her pour us a drink?
Well, just
And
he's
he says
contradicting
that,
everything he's saying.
Yeah, basically, he's not listening at all, is sort of how that is going. So, but Yalta is telling her husband Nachman, do something. And so the fact that Yalta is behind the scenes pushing Nachman, sort of like displaces any weight on this argument that it's, quote, for real. You see what I'm saying?
So a girl's. So wait, who is it?
So Nachman is
Yehuda
married to Yalta,
Yeah.
right? And Nachman is saying, may my daughter come give us a drink. And Yehuda's saying no. Nachman's saying, but she's small, so we're allowed to do this. And Yehuda's saying no. So Nachman's saying, well, how about saying hello to my wife? And Yehuda's saying no. And essentially, Yalta is the one who sort of like maybe wins over the day by saying, look, stop listening to this idiot Yehuda. He's insulting you. He's not listening, right? So the fact that she's even in there, or that that Yehuda's coming to say, the voice of a woman is erva, she's the one who's coming to say he's full of crap, right? Essentially, in non-Talmudic terms.
It's not a Talmudic term that's full of crap, but that's the idea, the whole thing, and it's the concluding sentence actually states that in polite terms, so that Rabbi Yehuda is not listening to anything Nachman is saying.
Yeah, Yehuda is being very insular, not wanting to listen, not wanting to be involved or have anything to do with, quote, women in this. And Yalta takes that as an insult to her husband.
And Talmud thinks it's important to state this opinion of Yalta,
Right.
which means basically there is
The woman is heard.
opinion
And the woman is heard.
Yehuda's taking upon himself a stringency.
Right.
It's like the Arizal used to keep 24 hours between meat and milk. And someone's telling him, like, oh, listen, let's keep 6, and Arizal's coming up with reasons why he doesn't want to keep 6. It's a stringency he's keeping on
But
himself.
the chumrah is a problem. Anytime we add chumras, then you're like sort of, how many fences do you want to put? That's the question.
But it's more than a fence, in my
It's
opinion.
more than-
It's the way people, if you consider that men and women are part of the Jewish population or the congregation, it's how people interact with one another. It goes much more essential or much deeper than just fences around fences.
I am just reading now Rabbi Abram Joshua Heschel,
Yeah.
and he states that we should worship the Lord with joy and love, and rabbis over the centuries continued to add more and more stringent interpretation of the law, to the point where the majority of law-abiding Jews, he's not talking about heretics, he's talking about law-abiding Jews, majority of law-abiding Jews are losing the joy of service because of the endless chumrot.
That's his opinion.
I don't know, for me, Abraham Joshua Herschel is.
Heschel carries some weight.
Carries some weight.
That's still an opinion. I mean, not talking, that there's no law that you can't talk to women, but I think what they're saying in the Talmud is that if they want to take
If you-
it as a
it depends
stringency
on how
upon
you wanna
themselves, that we don't even want to associate with any woman except for our wife, the real thing is not whether, it's so that men don't cheat on their wives and that there's not adultery. That's really what the whole stringency is about. Not listening to music is a stringency to stop adultery from happening.
You could argue that. And
No, I mean,
that-
that's like what it is. It goes back to
You could make that
yeah.
point. I'm
the
not sure that I would
theoretic
agree with it.
commandment. Huh?
I'm not sure that I
The
would agree with
theoretic
it.
commandment from Maimonides, it says you guys shall not act like, the word sort of like prostitute, promiscuous, right? And that's where the fence comes around, not to listen to music, because it'll attract the man to where he'll feel an attraction to a woman that's besides his wife, and lead to some sort of adultery.
But at least in the Talmud, Yalta is the one that has the last say.
Mhm.
Okay, at least in Talmud, Yalta
Is
is
the
a
one who has the
woman
last
who has the last say. And we're continuing, there will be other arguments here, but at the Talmud level, 2,000 years ago, sages gave the last say, wrote
Mhm.
down the opinion of a woman as a last statement. Obviously, Yalta wasn't too terribly worried about Rab Nachman's loyalty to her.
Right.
Yeah.
That's-
Well, yeah, maybe
that's what-
Yehuda was being too extreme in her opinion, to the point where like, listen, it's a kid. It's not even like realistic anymore.
But based on what you said, how would you handle last week's Torah portion?
Which was
You had, let's see, one fellow sleeping with 3 women and having kids that we call our tribes today.
Well,
so. What about it?
this is extreme. This is-
What about it? What's,
Why don't we
What's
move
wrong?
on to the
There's
next
no
paragraph?
the real problem is that
And
they
one
were
was a
sisters.
concubine.
Yeah, they were
Well,
sisters.
the third one was the concubine.
Well, this is very.
Concubines allowed. There's no rules against that. The real problem was that they were
Yes,
sisters.
You weren't married to my wife. There were lots of rules
Well, the
against
Talmud
that.
those things are no longer allowed. So, moving on to once again, Mike, you want to pick that up?
Right here.
Once again, say, is making a secondary use of Samuel's words, Kol
The Isha.
But in this case, it is not later anonymous editors of the Torah who have quoted,
Talmud.
thank you, Talmud, who have quoted Samuel, Rav Yehuda, one of the main disciples who quotes him almost 500 times in the Babylon Talmud. Rav Yehuda understood Samuel to say, a voice of a woman is erva, that is, do not talk to women. This is in keeping with other Talmudic
Conversations. So we've got a number of conversations, and there's actually some where, if speaking to a woman, one is to speak, directly and not have lots of flowery conversation, essentially. But again, it's an important point when Rabbi Lincoln is saying it's Talmudic dicta. Dicta is something that is not an actual opinion. It is kind of like, I don't even know how to describe it, like the fallout. It's not an official opinion. It's kind of like in between the lines.
It looks like this is just how he holds himself.
I'll get it.
That he doesn't even talk to women, period. But that's his thing. It's not like a law.
Well, there weren't really like exact hot quotes at this point anyway, right? So it wasn't until we get later to the things that were codified.
But probably his school, the people that followed him around him, probably held the opinions that he had because he was their teacher.
Maybe,
Hey, Bill. how
or
you doing?
maybe like in some of these cases, he's just giving him a bad time, which is often the case. Okay, so, yeah, so Yerushalmi. Hi, Bill, good to see you.
Sorry I'm late, here's a guild offering.
Guilt offerings, wow, those are awesome, thank you kindly.
Chapter 4, donations, according to the Torah,
Number 3.
when a person bakes a loaf of bread or cake, they're supposed to give a small portion of the dough called challah to a kohen. Today, this small portion is burned after reciting a blessing. The Mishnah in Challah says that a woman can sit and separate her challah and make the blessing while naked because she can't cover herself.
Okay, so she can actually perform this mitzvah naked. Got it?
From this we learn that her rear end is not forbidden because of her body. This is true regarding her reciting the blessing of Challah. But
Mike is fascinated with this. He's the challah maker. Actually, I have to say, for this last Shabbos, he made the most amazing Hanukkah challah. It was the best. It was very
That
good.
was only after your suggestion.
Well, but thank you kindly for creating it. It was very awesome. So, go ahead.
And I was not naked while I did it.
this is true regarding her.
This ain't a woman though.
This is true regarding her reciting the blessing of Challah, but to look at her, anything is forbidden. As we have learned, a person who looks at her heel is like one who looks at the house of her womb. And a person who looks at the house of the womb is as if he slept with her. Samuel said, the voice of a woman is erva. What is the reason? V'chaya mikol znuta. The land was defiled from the sound of her harlotry. Okay, it's early on. The land was defiled by her casual immorality.
I finally, thank you for reading that, because I finally understood what Jimmy Carter meant when he said he lusted.
Okay.
Is this, what is this, I'm sorry. What is this support? They say that a woman can separate challah, she could do mitzvahs while she's naked, so therefore it's not erva?
Right.
Because
For
there's
her,
no
but
one
what
looking
about
at
to a
her.
man?
Yeah,
What about
you-
to a man? Is it to like not distract the man from unholy thoughts, or is it? I mean, because I heard this one time that a woman cannot really truly be naked because the genitals are inside versus a man's side where the genitals are outside. So that's the nakedness, that's the exposed that they're talking about. But there's, I mean, you know, the bachitzas, these kind of things. It's like so that a man is not really thinking about that because I mean it's too much of a distraction to a man. He should be
Apparently,
praying.
some guys just keep their minds on the right thing. I mean, apparently women are
It's
able
not
to do
some
it, but
guys.
guys aren't.
It's all guys.
Okay, we're not going to debate that. We're going to move on to the next paragraph.
The third time Samuel's words are quoted in secondary fashion in a Talmudic discussion. Okay, so Galimkin brings this particular Yerushalmi
Right.
quote because the same Samuel Shmuel's words are quoted here again. He was not part of this discussion, and his words are not connected to the main topic, which is looking at a scandalous man woman who is sitting and separating the door for Hala. Once again, it's not clear what Samuel meant to say, but there is no hint whatsoever that he's referring to the singing voice of a woman.
So this is not, that's why he's bringing it, because it doesn't have to do with the singing.
Anything with the it's more likely that he's referring to speaking voice.
Right.
This is, if we were to rule on the basis of the three Talmudic passages, we could say that Samuel and his fellow Amoraim quoted the Brachot, quoted in Brachot, were making Hagaric statements, so not halachic, but
Correct,
Hagaric
correct.
statements.
Correct, which is a big difference.
Yes, so they were not rulings, they were just Agadah.
Right.
Statements.
Stories.
Story statements about the dangers of looking at and listening to women. On the other hand, we could say it in the basis of Kedushin and probably Yerushalmi Halah that Samuel made a halachic ruling that it is forbidden to speak to women, or on the basis of the context of Brachot, that it is forbidden to speak to or look at women while reciting Kiryat Shema. It is pretty clear from the careful analysis about that none of these three passages say anything about a woman singing.
So basically, I think, you know, I mean, the deal or the unspoken piece is, if you're going to make this a halakhic issue, then it's going to be you can't speak to women. But obviously that's not the issue, and obviously that's not where we currently are. So, and now we're moving on to the Rif, who ignored Shmuel's statements in both passages in the Babylonian Talmud.
I have a quick question.
Sure.
So, going back to baking challah,
Yes.
And separating color.
Yes,
All right, so I'm assuming that as a man, if I make color by reading that, and I'm dressed, then do I also have to separate color? And
we
and the
are
second
not,
part-
we are not, like, even in the same realm. This has absolutely nothing to do with what men do when they do, separate color. We're not even in that context, not even in that world. So this only is
Although
being
there's
brought
another-
for very, what's
There's
that?
another rabbinic piece about how men should dress when doing any mitzvah.
Sure.
Or consciously doing a mitzvah.
Sure.
And that's why in Orthodox households, when they go to say Birkat after dinner, they feel they have to get dressed more than just for dinner. So they put on their
Put back on the,
something, the prayer robe or something.
why am I losing the word? The robe, the kaftan,
Kittel?
well,
No,
not
it's not a
kittle.
kittel, but it's just a robe
Yeah,
that just elevates them
Right.
in a particular way. So there is thought that
and men are also supposed to have belts. I mean, there's all sorts of pieces with regard to how men are supposed to be dressed generally. Which is very interesting that they're bringing this little piece of,
But I don't think that was,
Agata
that,
that way.
that was a point, Mike. I think the point was just trying to prove that it had nothing to do with the singing.
right? So, when we're targeted in one direction, all facts and everything is gonna be looking at that. And I don't know that we can draw inferences about other pieces yet. So we could talk about that, we could go look that up, or bring information about it, but I think, probably Ellen summed it up pretty well with regard to, women and what they're supposed to be wearing for mitzvah. Okay, the riff.
The Rif ignores Samuel's statement in both passages in the Babylonian Talmud. The Rif, Rabbi Yitzhak al-Fasi, 1013-1103, was one of the most influential post-King
Halachic decisors, yeah.
in Jewish history. Maimonides stated that he relied on the Rif in his Mishnah Torah in all but 30 places. Responsa for the Rambam and the literature cited there is in note 7.
Hilchot Harif,
Hilchot Harif, also known as Talmud Katan, the Little Talmud, codified Jewish law by abbreviating Sugya in the Talmud. He omitted the
Agadic,
Agadic passages and most of the give and take of the Talmudic Sugya, leaving only the opinions which he considered Jewish law. In the Sugya and the Berachot quoted above, the Rif omitted the opinion of all four Amorim quoted by the Talmud. An emphasis by Rabbi Zerahiah Halevi and by the Rabbi Avadah of Poskuriz, is that correct? It's French. In this quote on Kiddushin, the Rif quotes a few of the dicta of Samuel quoted by Rav Yehuda, but omits the dictum called Shafah, that this means that the Rif considered all four of the Amaric statements in the Brachot to be Agadah and not Halakha.
Okay, so that's just like an important piece in terms of building this argument. So the fact that the Rif does not put them anywhere into his work indicates that these are not, or were not, considered halachic. They were agadic. So they were stories, they were not law. Okay, so the next one, how are you doing there, Bill? Can you figure out where we're at?
Okay, we're on page what?
It's gonna be different between,
Oh, okay, because.
I think Monica has the same one he has.
okay,
Yeah.
we're on page
Okay.
4 of 10.
No wonder I was lost. I was on page 5 and I'm going, that doesn't make sense.
It is forbidden to talk to women or to certain women. In Rambam's summary of
It's because I
the,
don't have page 4.
Sugya and brachot,
okay, he rules that one may not recite
kriyat shema,
Kiryat Shema while looking at a woman, even his wife, as per the Talmud's explanation of Rabbi Yishak's quote in the above Berachot. But he omits Samuel's opinion entirely. But in his laws of forbidden sexual relationship, he ruled that one should not wink at or laugh with or look at the little finger of one of the Araya, one of the forbidden sexual relationships listed in Leviticus, and even to hear the voice of the Erva or see her hair is forbidden. Rambam seems to understand Samuel to mean, big word,
Kol be'isha erva is asur, or not permitted.
The voice of a woman who is an erva is forbidden. This is a rather novel interpretation since that is not exactly what Samuel said. In any case, the Rambam is clearly referring to her speaking voice and not her singing voice.
So, and maybe this is more pointed towards a certain kind of woman, not to women in general. So that seems to be kind of like the underlying issue. Ed?
Okay, this is proven by his famous response to listening to secular Arabic girdle phones sung to music. After giving 4 reasons to forbid this music, he writes, and if the singer is a woman, there is a 5th prohibition, as they of blessed memory said,
Kol be'isha erva.
and how much more so if she was singing. In other words, Samuel is referring to women speaking, and Rambam added that it is even more forbidden if she is singing. Rabbi Yaakov Ben Asher followed the Rambam in his Torah, one of the major codes of Jewish law, as did the Maharashal, quoted by
Parishat Even HaEzer.
subparagraph 2. You know, someone else better read this, because I am
Ed, are ya?
terribly.
I don't know exactly where we
A
are.
similar
So
opinion. Let's get you on the right page there.
All right, a similar opinion found in Sefer Hasidim, which is attributed to Rabbi Yehuda Hasid, is a contemporary of the Rambam. He's from
So we're like
Regensburg.
looking at 1200, late 1100. Go ahead.
He says that a young man should not teach girls practical Jewish law, even if her father is standing there, lest he or the girl be overcome by the evil inclination. And kol bi'isha erva. Rather, a father should teach the daughter and wife. Thus, Rabbi Yehuda thinks that Shmuel was referring to listening to the speaking voice of a woman or girl. It also seems to be the opinion of Rabbi Yitzhak ben Isaac of Vienna. Where's the reports? And the Rosh.
So,
Okay.
okay, so apparently these are the 2 opinions. There are several opinions that we've got. Certain women, it may be problematic for them to be spoken to. Anyone pick up?
It is forbidden to listen to women singing while reciting the Shema. The halakhic authorities in this camp ruled according to their understanding of the sugya and brachot, which is connected to Kiryat Shema, and ignored the sugya in Kiddushin. Rav Hai Gaon ruled Atzar Hagenim to Brachot Perushin that a man should not recite the Shema when a woman is singing because kol ba'isha erva, but when she is just talking normally it is permitted, even if she is singing, if he can concentrate in his heart on his prayer so that he does not hear her or pay attention to her, it is permissible. In other words, he understood from the context in the Brachot that Samuel not only says kol ba'isha erva when one is reciting the Shema, and he further understood that Samuel was referring to a woman singing. Even so, Rav Hai allowed a man to recite Kiryat Shema when a woman is singing if he is able to ignore her voice. This general approach was followed by a number of classic Ashkenazic poskim, such as Rabbi Eliezer of Metz, Sefer Yeraim HaShalem, the Ra'aviyah, Brachot, and the Mordecai to Brachot paragraph. Rabbi Eliezer of Metz, on one hand, adds a stringency that one may not recite the Shema or Devar Kedusha when a woman is singing, but also
So Devar Kedusha is, quote, a word of holiness, so go ahead.
when a woman is singing, but also a leniency that because of our sins we live among the Gentiles, and therefore we are not careful not to learn while Gentile women are singing. The Ra'aviyah adds a leniency that for the 3rd time, they're just out of order, hang on, okay. May recite Kiryat Shema when a woman is singing if he's used to it or to her voice. This general approach was also applied by Aharonim, such as the Bet Shmuel to Shulchan Aruch, even HaEzer 21, subparagraph 4, who expands the prohibition to Tefillah as opposed to only the Shema.
Okay, so what have we learned in this section?
That it is predominantly a Gentile woman that we don't want to influence us when we're trying to pray.
Well, okay, maybe. There's some issue apparently, if somebody's listening to a woman while they're reciting the Shema, so in other words, while they're praying. So, but if they're used to their voice, most of the Ashkenazi poskim are saying, okay, you're used to the voice, it's not anything unusual. And even if you're studying, okay, when a woman's singing, there's some kind of leniency if it doesn't bother you, if you can still concentrate in your heart. Okay.
It's a general main point that, you know, when you're in prayer, you should isolate and be out of all distraction.
I think that has a lot to do with it, yeah.
Seem to be the main point.
And this, actually, the beginning, the impetus behind this is some of the movement in Israel. There was, within the IDF, the Israeli Defense Forces, some guys got up and walked out when a woman was singing in one of the cadet troops. Okay? And women are also apparently disappearing from billboards and such, in advertisements and that kind of thing.
Right now, currently.
Right, so that it's been publicized in the media a lot, so that's why we actually had 2 different people bring this, which is why we're studying this today. So,
It's interesting, there's one where they cite scandal clad.
right,
I didn't think that in Israel, particularly in Europe or in any Jewish settlement, if you will, there was anything other than heavy clothing. That's what people had.
There's such a difference between Eilat and Jerusalem.
yeah, or Tel Aviv,
Or even-
right,
yeah.
you know, and
Yeah,
Mea Shearim. I mean, you know, just there's great differences in different neighborhoods. So there's signs posted at the edge of Mea Shearim. You know, don't come in here if you're not properly dressed. And even in, you know, outside of some of the kibburim, the you know, grave sites and that kind of thing, you have to be, quote, appropriately dressed. Men and women, yeah, but it's sort of like, you know, pointing towards the
Get
women.
the impression that, you know, in a Jewish population, particularly Israel, is pretty heavily clad.
It's not, it's wrong impression. It's really very, very much depends where you are in Israel. When I first arrived from Russia, I was living in Jerusalem, and I was from Siberia. I was used to never to go bare leg outside in public. I mean, this long skirt, but I still would have some kind of voice. And I just remember my first impression of Tel Aviv. I just was absolutely flabbergasted by the nakedness of the bodies all over the place. So I didn't study anything about modesty, and I was an engineer, construction site, working on a construction site. But when I came to Tel Aviv, it's a different city. Israel is tremendously multifaceted, and now there's well, from the very creation of Israel, there was a lot of social tensions because people came from different backgrounds. There are people that came from my background. It's not Tel Aviv, it's total like
Las Vegas.
Las Vegas or whatever. Yeah, it's house of sin, you know. It was shocking to me. Even so, I was not even. I definitely was not Orthodox. Whatever.
Vegas actually has kind of a bad rap, but you know, in terms of its kind of public persona, if you will. I mean, even, you know, traveling there and seeing billboards and that kind of thing, it's
no,
different than Reno.
But
I mean, even in terms of the culture. Although, and these days there's what, 80,000 Jews in Vegas? I mean, they're the largest and most rapidly growing Jewish
Well,
population.
I think this came from a different, slightly different direction. So originally there was this huge problem at the Kotel where the women of the wall wanted to pray out loud, and it became a big deal, such that first Orthodox men would like throw things at the women, and then the police came in to protect them, and then the courts decided that the Orthodox were right and the women shouldn't be there. And so that was thought as a very, what's the word, negative thing for women's rights. And in fact, the whole piece, I mean, the whole Orthodox stance of you know, all these rulings are very oppressive to women in general. They mean that girls shouldn't go to school because of the men teachers. I mean, all these things fall out that are oppressive to women. And so there's this huge movement called Women of the Wall to sort of fight that oppression. And I guess liberal Jews in general thought, well, that's just a little problem in Jerusalem. We don't really care about Jerusalem. However, the thing that happened in the IDF camp was huge. It made a huge impact on Israeli population because military service is sort of the unifying thing of all Israelis. Every single Israeli
That's right.
18-year-old goes into the army, with very few exceptions. And so the fact that there would be this huge thing where suddenly they thought, holy smokes, that means that we can't even sit as a unit and sing, Birkat Hamazon together. And that's like an unbelievable impact on Israeli society. And then it came to head that certain Orthodox boys stood up and walked out. First, the newspapers portrayed that as, hundreds of Israeli soldiers walked out of this event because some women started singing. And then it was corrected after various letters and testimony. It says, oh no, it turned out it was just a few Israeli soldiers walked out to make a point. And it's become a big thing now.
That's right.
And that's why we're studying.
And that's why we're studying it. Okay, so pick up on 5 there, a combination of the previous 2 approaches.
A number of prominent halakhic authorities combined with the previous 2 approaches. They ruled that a man should not talk to a woman on the basis of Samuel in Kiddushim, as in paragraph 3 above, and that a man should not recite the Shema while a woman is singing on the basis of Berachot as understood in paragraph 4 above. This camp includes the Ravad of Poskiris, the
Meiri and Kara.
and Rabbi Yosef Kara in the Shulchan Aruch. 6, it is forbidden to listen to all women singing at any time. This approach was first suggested as a possible interpretation of Rabbi Joshua Falk in his Pirusha to Tur Even Ha'ezer, but he himself rejected it. The first to actually rule this way in practice was Rabbi Moshe Sofer. Aside from the fact that this very strict approach contradicts all of the halakhic sources we have seen above, we also know from the research of Emily Tietz that this approach contradicts the actual practice of Jewish women who sang in the home on festive occasions as singers in the synagogue throughout the Middle Ages. Unfortunately, the Hatam Sofer's strict ruling was adopted by many later authorities. Some tried to find leniencies, such as allowing girls and boys to sing at the same time, or allowing men to listen to women who cannot be seen, such as on a record or on the radio.
Okay, so we've got our Talmudic sources and the Rif and his impression and what he left out of his book as probably our classic pieces and our classic works. So let's just jump down to the summary and conclusions because we're out of time.
Yeah, I'm on page 7 of 10, and I guess
Okay,
other ones
summary
are
and
different
conclusions.
places. Yeah, summary conclusions. We have seen above that there is no general prohibition against women singing in classic Jewish law based on the Talmud and subsequent codes and commentaries until the early 19th century. The current blanket prohibition accepted by Haredi and some of the modern Orthodox rabbi was first suggested and rejected by Rabbi Joshua Falk and was only given as a halakhic ruling by Rabbi Moshe Sofer, the Hatam Sofer, in the 19th century.
Okay, so that's when it becomes halakha. We're talking 1800s.
So what about Rambam in the 1200s?
Rambam doesn't, we're talking certain women. It's not a blanket prohibition. The Haredi have a blanket prohibition, but if you go back to Rambam, it's not a blanket prohibition.
But 1150 right here, it says a boy and a girl shouldn't even talk to each other, and that's in 1150.
We're talking.
How much more so singing? They say they
Then
shouldn't
he
even
should've
talk
written
to
it.
each other, so therefore, how
Then he
much
should
more
have
so?
written, you can make the argument, but he didn't make the argument. Rambam doesn't make the argument.
He does right here. He says, "Listen, you can't listen to them talk. How much more so does that apply to singing? Because it's still a voice. The voice."
That's your argument and your Kiddush and your Chumrah on Rambam, but it's not what Rambam has to say.
It's a big difference in it right here.
It's like he's talking about this sentence, and if the singer is a woman, that is in a context of secular Arabic
Girdle poems, so
and
looking at it in
if the singer
context.
is a woman, there is a fifth prohibition as they are, they of blessed memory said, called Isha Arba, and how much the more so if she is singing. And this was Rambam. In other words, Samuel was referring to women speaking, and the Rambam adds that it is even more forbidden if she's singing. So
In the context of
in the
specific,
context of-
I don't know what a girdle poem is, it sounds like kind of this, kind of an interesting thing. But in any
this is secular art, the gathering when the women recite poetry in the presence of, but this is only specific women which are actors, which are looked down by Islam, really, but
Okay, so
However,
let's just
this-
finish up this paragraph, and
This
we're gonna be done.
opinion is not in agreement with the simple meaning of the dictum by Samuel and with all of the opinions of the Rishonim. The Rif ignored Samuel's dictum in both
Brachot and
Brachot
Kiddushin.
and Kiddushin. Some Rishonim ruled according to this Suga in Kiddushin that Samuel was referring to the speaking voice of women to the extent that such conversation would lead to forbidden sexual relations.
Which I think was Ed's point.
The interpretation seems to be the intent of the parallel Yerushalmi Halal.
Chala, that's the
name.
section, the tractate, Chala.
Okay. On the other hand, Rav Hai Galan and most of the Rishonim and Ashkenazi interpretation of the words of Samuel according to the Sega in Brachot, and therefore ruled that it is forbidden to recite Kiryat Shema where a woman is singing because of Kol Bishav Era. Finally, some of the rabbis of Provence and Rabbi Joseph Caro ruled according to both of these interpretations. Furthermore, Emily has shown that it is practice that in practice Jewish women sang at home at Simchot singers and in the synagogue throughout the Middle Ages. There is therefore no halakhic justification for anyone walking out when women sing. But even if one accepts the very strict ruling of Hatam Sofer, it is
From the
forbidden.
1800s, yeah.
It is forbidden to walk out in order to insult a female.
Do not insult. So even if you're gonna hold by that, you need to not insult someone. So Ed, how are we doing here? Are we like sort of on the same page,
I
or
don't know,
what are we?
I don't know.
Where are we at?
It's very well researched. I think this is an elaborate way to justify religious discrimination. It's like requiring a Catholic to eat meat on Friday and telling him if he refuses to eat meat, you're released from the army. It's religious discrimination.
In terms of
Discriminating
requiring
against the Orthodox in the.
Yeah, absolutely. Requiring the Orthodox to listen to female singers. I believe that the Ashkenazi rabbi calling for a ban of all female singers, that's a little too far. But if you're Orthodox, you hold that way, you should have the option to not be required to partake in a musical thing that goes against your group's customs.
Here you're only referring to the Ashkenazic chief rabbi.
I don't know what the Sephardic guy had. Well, the Lincoln's gonna go with
Women singing in
the.
Sephardic music has been a custom for years and centuries, more so than Ashkenazic.
But he's
and the
trying
only
to
thing-
bring up just the
Right.
Ashkenazi
But the only thing
situation.
recently the Ashkenazic and Sephardic rabbis agreed upon was praying for rain. in Israel. And that was it, because normally there are loggerheads all the time. So.
We need Tony, where's Tony when you need him? Anyway, thank you all very much for an interesting
He's in
discussion
Israel
today.
listening to the rabbinical arguments.
This is when I'd like to come with this an extra copy.
So you're
Yes.
gonna come back?
You're
Actually,
welcome to.
I'm just coming through town. I'm gonna be gone, day after